going on a boat somewhere where it's a rough sea and dive 80 meters without anchoring the boat, putting explosives on a pipes that you can't really see, coming up and going home is not an easy task.
80 meters, it's something. It takes you like 45 minutes to go down, then put explosives, then go up. Our colleagues from Germany, they did experiment and they dived into this place to check if it's possible.
Czech Center for Investigative Reporting and Dark Riviera present Protagonista, a war room content project hosted by Pavla Holcová. Protagonista puts investigative reporters at the heart of the story. Wojciech Cieśla is a Polish investigative reporter whose journalistic mission emerged from Poland's communist collapse. He reveals a career-threatening mistake that nearly destroyed him, alongside his groundbreaking investigation into the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. Wojtek, you studied literature. How did you get to journalism?
In the middle of 80s.
That's the wrong time to get to journalism, in the middle of the 80s, because it's not really a journalism in Poland.
Yes, plus I was a teenager and not really doing journalism, more into, we can call it media, because as a teenager I used to be a cartoonist for a samizdat newspaper, underground newspaper in my...
Teenager means what age?
15, 16 years old.
You've been drawing cartoons for samizdat at the age of 15.
Yeah, because the quality of print was so low that we decided to make it more attractive to readers.
Are you from decent family? Was it your family publishing samizdat?
No, my mother was involved somehow. She was a teacher at a high school and she was fired because of politics in the mid of 80s. So in general, the mood was in the family. So when I joined the high school, it was very political high school. So we had like 2 newspapers during the time. And one of them was this, I was drawing pictures for.
High school samizdat.
Yeah, high school samizdat. But of course it sounds a bit weird today, but at the time it was still dangerous. And some friends who used to work with me on this, they were arrested. There were some sanctions, some consequences. People were fired from school and so on. So relatively dangerous, but still that was the end of the communism, the end of 80s in Poland. So
you survived.
Yeah. I don't want to say that we dismantled the system there, but it was like a beginning when I met people who write something, and that was my start. Then I started literature, and during the study I got a position in a newspaper, and that's how it started.
How did you get from drawing cartoons at the age of 15 to investigative reporting?
Oh my God. I started with Gazeta Wyborcza, the biggest daily in Poland, by the end of 90s. That was also a unique moment in the Polish history when we had this newborn capitalism also on the streets, and also a lot of violence, a lot of crime. And Gazeta was looking for young reporters to cover all this crime stuff. So
hardcore crime stuff, or exchanging money on the street and
more or less everything. We call it police department. So
police department of Gazeta Wyborcza?
Of local branch of Gazeta Wyborcza, Gazeta Stołeczna. So we were covering all those street shootings, explosions, crimes, court cases, and these sort of things for a couple of years. So like a very small little stories from everyday crime life of Warsaw. And one of the stories at the very beginning was something very close to people. We got an information that there is a newborn club in the middle of Warsaw that is annoying the neighbors. So the neighbors were the sources in this case. So it kind of intervention, very typical for local journalism, to help people to get information. So we started with a friend of mine, Ola Boćkowska, to dig into this case, because the club was very, very noisy. That was the reason that people approached Gazeta and asked for help. So we started to discover what's all about, who's behind the club, and so on. It appeared that there are some very influential people connected with local government, gangsters, actually. And when we exposed it, that was the beginning of the trouble.
So why was the club annoying to the neighbors? Because it was too loud, because it was unregulated, because they were selling drugs?
Of course, it was too loud and unregulated, and it was the club was exactly in the middle of a courtyard, so every neighbor could listen what is happening all the night. It was really, really annoying, and of course those people did not respect any laws. Finally, after many years, I think after 5 or 6 years, they got into legal troubles. So that was kind of a beginning for me. Then I discovered that if you dig deeper and have skills and patience, you can help people sometimes.
And then you worked for Polish Newsweek, but not as an investigative reporter. Does it mean that you had a full-time job and in the evenings you've been doing these really important corruption investigations? And how does it work?
It never worked. From time to time, I was allowed to do investigative stories. But in general, they were not really keen on them. Not interested in. So I had to beg my editors to do investigative stuff that I really like. And at the time I was already involved in sort of cross-border collaboration. I met already my friends from Investigate Europe. I did some stories with colleagues from Germany, and I saw so many advantages of not competing, but collaborating and sharing. And I discovered that it's very modern, what we do. Modern in a technical sense, that we use so many tools and new resources to help the stories to be more, accessible for readers.
You mean less boring, more entertaining?
More entertaining, but at the same time showing what they have to show, the truth. And of course, uncovering the truth, that's kind of archaeological / detective thing, a bit of pop culture. I'm not saying that I'm copy-pasting all this pop culture cliche, like all president's men meeting sources somewhere in a garage, whatever. But this detective part is very, very exciting. So I thought it's possible to make this important part of my professional life, investigative journalism, as a side project, and earning money for living at Newsweek Poland. I was wrong.
It didn't work out?
It didn't work out.
Take me back to the moment when you decided to quit Newsweek and you've been just like, I can't and I don't want to do it anymore.
I think because of my writing skills. Can I say I've been used to cover different stories for Newsweek, and some of them really plain, unnecessary. They used to send me, for example, to cover short biographies of sport people, like a speedway competition or some famous. This one I remember. They sent me somewhere in Poland to cover a story about very famous football player.
That's exciting.
I have nothing to do with football. I don't know the rules. I don't watch football. Really, it was... And out of the blue, I'm somewhere in Poland trying to find relatives of this football player and so on. That was the moment I thought, okay, what am I doing here? Really, the world is out there waiting. There are so many stories, and I want to be involved in something more important also for the society. Who cares about... I mean, maybe some people care about what happened in a childhood of a famous football player, but it's not me. And as a society, we of course need also those information, but in general, I think we deserve better, and we deserve properly fact-checked research, deep information about what is happening around us, and it's happening a lot now.
But then it developed, and what did you tell to Newsweek? Like, I'm done.
I think the Newsweek told me first. They are done. But I got it with relief.
One of the biggest stories and really important one you've done is about Nord Stream. Can you tell me how you developed the story as a journalist, and how you got interested in the topic? Because I know you are quite often at the sea, you love sailing, and this was kind of connected, right?
Yeah. So 2022, significant year in European history. We have a war in Ukraine, and in September the same year, someone dived into the Baltic Sea and put octagon. This is an explosive material, and gas pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and 2, were broken. And it means that Europe, or at least Germany, was cut from...
Especially Germany,
was cut from the Russian gas. That was a very major event for everybody, on a political level, also on a journalistic level, because I think what is very important about what we do in this cross-border environment is we collaborate. We were approached by the colleagues from Germany who got some information about who could be behind this story. And here we come to sailing, because we knew that there was a group of people who hired a boat in Eastern Germany, traveled for a couple of days, returned the boat, disappeared, and then explosions happened.
So could you take me from the beginning of the investigation? You found out that there's a travel agency that was renting a small yacht.
Yeah. So German authorities are probably more open than Polish. So they shared some information, like very basic info about this crew. That maybe suspects are people that rented a boat in Germany, and maybe they were behind. And the most interesting part for us was that they paid for the boat via Warsaw-based company that belongs to some Ukrainians.
So you went to see the company and talk to the staff there?
Yes, of course. This is my beloved practice, to check the files, to check the documents, to see what it's all about. And we quite quickly found out that this is a fake company, that it's being run by the proxies, and the real owners are hidden. We saw it from financial reports that the company that is doing nothing in 1 year.
How could you know it's doing nothing? It just rented a boat.
Yeah, but we checked in the Polish registry who's behind and what are the operations and what are the sources of income. And we knew that it's just fake. We visited the office, we checked who are the official owners and where are they, who are they, this sort of things. And it appeared that this is completely fake company and there is no reason for them to pay for this boat trip that was used to dismantle Nord Stream 1 and 2.
So you said the company was run by proxies. What does it mean?
Proxies means people who represent someone else. And sometimes, what we know from our journalistic practice, they only represent because they have nothing to do with the company and they just play the role.
So they're pretty much renting their identities to hide someone who is the real owner.
Yes. And then we started digging and knowing the name of the boat and some basic informations, we started to reconstructing what could really happen. We didn't know from the beginning who is behind Russians, Ukrainians, CIA, MI6. But then we got the information about Ukrainian group of 6 that through this Polish company rented a boat in Germany, traveled, returned the boat. They never got deposit back, which is unusual because it's more than €1,000 and people care about money usually. And we got more and more information. We knew that they used diving equipment, that they came from Poland. A lot of details that helped us partially reconstruct the story.
What would be the motivation? Because if people from Ukraine blew up the pipelines, I can understand, they were upset. They didn't want Russia to provide a gas to Europe. But they needed to know that they would pretty much piss Europe off, especially Germany.
I don't know the answer to this. For the time being, we thought it's a false flag Russian operation, but in my opinion, it's not. I mean, I don't have like a final answer to who did what in this operation, but I think the tracks lead to Ukraine, but who paid for it, who was organizing it, it's still unclear. There were different investigations into this case in Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and even in Poland. And Swedish and Danish are closed. There is still pending investigation in Germany and, pending investigation in Poland. I have the impression that Poles try to somehow cover up this story. They don't collaborate. By the way, none of those countries that were interested in, because these explosions happened on transnational waters, very close to Denmark, Sweden, and Germany. Even being somehow connected by this situation, all those countries decided not to provide common investigation, but to make separate investigations. So something opposite to what we do, because we collaborate and we exchange. And then we know much, much more sometimes than the prosecutor office. It's so politically important on a very high level and also important for everyday life of European citizens, because since that time we pay higher prices for the gas, which is, in my opinion, one of the consequences of cutting off Nord Stream.
So you discovered this weird group of people that were renting a boat, and then, what is the hypothesis, what they did with the boat?
The easiest way to answer would be to check the AIS track.
What means the...
AIS is automatic identification system that many boats use to identify each other on the water. It helps you when you see on a radar that someone is coming or going this way, that way. And all vessels with AIS, they leave a track. So you can check in the timeline where they were, for example, 3 months ago. What was the port of destination? What was the route of the vessel? But this specific one boat, even being quite modern and big, had no AIS. So they didn't...
Isn't it illegal not to have it?
It's not obligatory. I mean, it helps you. It's kind of safety, security item. It's expensive. So I think AIS device is like around a couple of €1,000.
So it was kind of a ghost ship among other boats.
But then, not knowing what was the road exactly, we started to collect information from the ports. And we discovered that they were in Rostock, in Germany, Christiansø in Denmark, in Sweden, and also in Poland in a port, Kołobrzeg.
So how do you collect this kind of information? Because you come to the port, but the boat is not there.
Yeah, but there are sailors, my beloved community.